Alrighty, welcome back, everyone. We just broke down the game day game of the week with South Carolina going to LSU going to South Carolina. I do think LSU wins that one by 7. Very close game, but I think LSU does just enough. And then we got into Tulane. I think OU wins that one. I think the defense is too tough for Tulane to really find too many openings in this one, and the Sooners get a much needed win as they head into SEC play. But let's get into a couple of the former matchups that we saw in the Pac-12 that we very much missed, but glad to see them back on the schedule, even though it's not in the normal time of the year that we're used to. But let's get into these real quick. And Oregon State is a very fun one. I think this is the one that is probably a little bit more far-fetched to see that upset for Oregon State, but doesn't mean they're not coming into this one thinking they can win it. I love seeing this one on the schedule, really want this one to be on there for quite some time, and we'll see what happens, especially with a lot of the changes happening around the Pac-12 right now that we will get into tomorrow. I promise you there are a lot of things going on over there that we have to make sure you guys know about, but at the end of the day, this is a very fun game, and just can't wait to see those two jerseys on the field as much as often going forward. But the guys to watch, Jamias Griffin, very, very talented player. One of those guys, he started his career at Georgia Tech, was a Georgia Tech Gatorade Player of the Year, I believe, when he came out of high school, going to Georgia Tech, and then didn't quite work out the way that he wanted to. Got a little bit stuck behind Jahmyr Gibbs, I won't lie to you, but a very talented guy that can absolutely play and has done really good work through a couple of years over there at Oregon State. I expect him to be a huge part of this game plan on Saturday. And then Skylar Thomas is someone that has been through this. He's been at Oregon State for a couple of years. He saw what Oregon did the last couple of years, and he saw them walk out the door. He is coming into this game with a little bit more energy than just about anyone else in that locker room. Cannot wait to see what this kid does, and I have a inkling that he is going to be shot out of a cannon that first play. But cannot wait to see what he does this game. And then Tez Johnson, you have to get more involved. This Oregon team, he has 15 catches for 80 yards. This is one of the most dynamic, explosive players in the entire country, and not being able to utilize him downfield is killing this Oregon offense. They have to be able to push the field with him and then let Evan Stewart do what he does, which is work underneath, be a tactician, and then catch the ball and get upfield. They have to be able to get Tez Johnson downfield in this game, and if they can't, then it might just be an issue that follows them the entire year. And guess what? If you can't stretch out this Ohio State defense, they are going to suffocate you and make your offense look downright anemic on that Saturday. So get this guy involved as quickly as possible on Saturday, and then let him get downfield. Throw those big-time passes that Dillon Gabriel does struggle to throw, but he's got to be able to pull the trigger in some moments and get this guy going, because he's way too dangerous of a player to have 80 yards through 2 weeks. That is for sure. And then Jordan Burch. I think when you talk about this Oregon State team, there are so many different things to take into account, but the run game is going to be huge. And I think when you have that edge rusher that can keep everything kind of contained, can keep everything pushed towards the interior guys of Derek Harmon and Jamari Caldwell, you're going to have a lot of success. And this is a guy that can essentially just wreck the game from start if he were to get a pick or a fumble six or something like that. But at the end of the day, I think if they can't get this guy out of the game, they have very little shot to win this one. And then also, if you can't slow this game down, you have no shot to win this one. I think Oregon State has a very fun running back duo of Jam Griffin and Anthony Hankerson, and both those guys are really, really fun. They're very experienced players. They know exactly what they need to do in this offense. They have to slow this game down. They know that they are going to be relatively outmatched all over the place when Oregon's offense comes on the field. So they're going to have to make sure this game is as slow as can be, and then get a couple of turnovers, which is how you get them, is you put them in obvious passing downs. That's the way that they're going to have to go about playing this game. Dillon Gabriel has not been good about pushing the ball downfield really throughout his career, but particularly this year it's been downright terrible. And you're going to have to put him in 3rd and 8, 3rd and 12, 3rd and 10, and then force him to push the ball just a little bit downfield, because then a mistake could happen. If you're Oregon State, you're going to need a couple of mistakes in this game, and the real only way to do that, in my opinion, is force this team to throw downfield in a way that they have not been able to thus far. And then finally, use that extra energy. There's so much pent-up energy in this program right now against Oregon and against all the teams that left them behind. Use all of that. Use your fans' energy. Trent Bray, it came up from the DC role to take over the head coaching job. he knows what this is about. All of the fans know what this is about, and a lot of the players on that field know what this is about. Use all of that energy. Use all of that anger that is pent up for the last little bit and has made you really stew against this team. Use all of it on Saturday and see if you can come out with a win. And then some matchups to watch. Obviously, these Oregon wide receivers are going to be a lot for this Oregon State back end, but they're going to have to be able to hold up at least a little bit. It doesn't have to be perfect because the reality is you're not going to play Tez Johnson and Evan Stewart and be perfect on that back end. That's just the reality, but if you can keep these guys under wraps just a little bit, if you can keep especially a cap on this team and not let them get over top and take this crowd out of the game, you're going to have a lot of success. So you're likely not going to outright win this matchup if you're Oregon State, but if you can go punch for punch at the very least, then you're going to have a lot of success. And then the Oregon State front seven against the Oregon O-line is fascinating because the Oregon State front seven isn't necessarily the strongest group in the world. The Oregon O-line has just looked downright terrible through a couple of weeks, and you're going to have to find a way to get after them the first couple of drives, and if you can, then Dillon Gabriel starts to think about things, and he starts to force balls where he doesn't need to, and he starts to get the ball out a little bit earlier when he doesn't need to, and then mistakes can happen. So you're going to have to get out this O-line that has had real struggle stopping just about anyone right about now. So it's going to be really interesting to watch, and especially if Oregon wants to get that run game going. If the Oregon State front seven is up to the challenge, then they're not going to be able to, and it's going to be fascinating to watch that unfold. And then finally, Jeffrey Bossa and these Oregon linebackers against this duo for Oregon State out of the backfield. These guys are so dynamic, so dangerous, and they have so many guys that can cause you big-time problems. I realize I have Carson Bruner down there. Do not mean to have Carson Bruner down there, but a very talented group over at Oregon nonetheless, and they're going to have their hands full, no doubt about it, with this run game, and if they let these running backs get going, then Oregon State has a real shot in this game. But I think Oregon makes a statement this week. I think they prove everyone that they are the team that we all thought they were going into the season. They are not the team that we saw in the first couple of weeks. I think it was more of a mentality thing than anything else. And I'll get into this a little bit later in the show as well. But I do expect Oregon to win this one pretty comfortably and kind of shoot themselves back up into that conversation for the title. Moving on to Washington State, the Apple Cup as they call it. Cannot wait for this one because it's basically a Pac-12 game. It's not like Washington went off and, got all this talent and Washington State was absolutely gutted. These are two teams pretty much where they were a year ago, where Washington is favored by about 4.5 points. They were probably favored by more a year ago with all of the changes that have happened over there. But I think this is going to be a very interesting matchup because you have one team in Washington State that is going to try to run the ball with their quarterback, with their running backs. They're going to try to be able to slow this game down. On Washington's side, obviously a little bit more pass heavy with Jed Fish, but they are a little bit of a balanced offense. It's just Washington State is very aggressively towards the running side of things. But the guys to watch in this game, I think, you talk about this Washington offense, there's so much passing that going on, especially with someone like Will Rogers taking over at quarterback. Jonah Coleman can bury this game for them. Jonah Coleman, if he takes over at that running back position, can just totally take over and make it really, really tough for Washington State to get much of anything going because your offense isn't on the field enough. And when you have a Washington front seven against what Washington State has on that front seven, it's going to be a lot of really, really tough battles for Washington State throughout this game. And if Jonah Coleman gets going on top of that, you're going to have an impossible time stopping this Washington offense. And then on the defensive side of the ball, Zach Durfee is such a talented player. One of those guys that I believe popped up onto the screen during the playoff last year, and I'm sure Washington fans knew him well before that, but in the national standpoint, he really popped onto the scene last year, and very, very talented player. One of those guys that can really keep this quarterback run game for Washington State kind of at bay because he is so dangerous off that edge roll, whether it's pass rushing or holding up against the run or setting an edge. He can do all of that stuff, and that's a huge, huge thing to have, especially against a team that is going to utilize that quarterback run game pretty consistently throughout this one. Over the Washington State side, Kyle Williams is a very talented wide receiver for them. One of those guys that you have to have at least a couple of guys in this game that can play on that level, that can play on the Washington level. This is one of those guys. He plays really, really complete football, very, very smart player, and one of those guys that if Washington lets get free just a couple of times in this game could totally change it over in a couple of seconds. And then Kapina Gushikin, a very talented DB for Washington State. This is a guy that has been through it a lot. He has been at Washington State for quite some time. He knows what Washington did. He knows what Oregon did, and he knows that they kind of left them in the lurch over there. I'm sure he's bringing that energy into this game. Cannot wait to see what he does. Kind of like I'm blanking on his name right about now, and I will get it here in a second. Kind of like Skylar Thomas on the other side for Oregon State. You're going to have to get a lot from this kid, and the energy from this kid is going to have to be impeccable throughout this one. But let's get into how Washington State can pull this one off. John Mateer has to take over. He is the rushing game for this team in so many different ways. Has 192 yards against Texas Tech a week ago, is the leading rusher on this team, and you're going to have to make sure that he gets loose. It's going to be really, really tough to do against guys like Carson Bruner and against guys like Zach Durfee, but he has to be a factor in this game. There's no two ways about that. If he is not a factor in this game, then there's no shot that Washington State can get this one done. So get him out there on the edge, pick his moments in the passing game, and then hope that this Washington defense does not react the way that you expect. And then hold this pass rush at bay. We talked about Zach Durfee. They've had 8 sacks through 2 games up there at Washington, and granted it was lesser competition, but they're still going to be a little bit outmatched if you're Washington State trying to block these guys. So they're going to have to make sure they at least keep them at bay and at least give John Mateer a little bit of time to digest this defense, because if they're under him in 2 seconds, then the run game won't get going, the quarterback run game won't get going, and a couple of mistakes will definitely come from that. I can promise you that. And then I apologize. And then throw the first punch. That is the biggest thing in this game. Washington's still a little bit unproven. I think they are playing really good football and have some very talented players on that team, but there's still a team that has not been punched yet. There's still a team that has not been hit yet, at least first. And if you can get out into Husky Stadium and get that first touchdown or get that first takeaway, you're going to have the ability to win this game. It's going to be a very tough game, no doubt about it, but the reality is when you look at this group and when you look at what Washington can do, especially in the Husky Stadium, if Washington State does not throw the first punch, then Washington might just be able to roll over them the entire day. Matchups to watch for this one, the Wazoo O-line needs to hold up. They need to be able to keep this Washington D-line at bay, because if they don't get a run game going in this one, Washington's going to feast. There's no two ways about that. They're just going to be able to suffocate them, and it's going to be something like 24-6 at the end of the day. But if this O-line can hold up a little bit, then maybe John Mateer and these running backs can get going, and then maybe you have a little bit of a conversation happening around that. And then the Wazoo DBs against Will Rogers is fascinating to me, because I think it's a lot of baiting in this game. I think you're trying to get Will Rogers to make that one big mistake that he hasn't made thus far, but has been known to make in the past. So the DBs and the defensive coordinator in general are going to have to become ready for this game, and are going to have to just try to bait him into a couple of tight throws, a couple of tight windows that look really good at the moment, and then you step in front of it and take it the other way for 6 points. So it's going to be something that likely has to happen in this game, is just one mistake from that kid, and those DBs are going to have a ton on their plate to kind of keep track of all of the craziness in Jed Fish's offense, that is for sure. And then the Wazoo run game against these Washington linebackers is outright huge. Carson Bruner is one of the best in the entire country, and he's going to have his hands full with 2 very good running backs coming his way in Jam Griffin and Anthony Hankerson. So it's going to be really awesome to watch this matchup, and frankly, I think Washington State could win this matchup. And if they do, then you're having a really interesting conversation about who can possibly win this game. And I think this one goes down to the wire. I think this one is very, very tough and very tight, but Washington, I do think, pulls away. I think they have an ability, and they have the depth on defense and offense to be able to handle this Washington State offense. I think Washington State has a shot in this game. I just think too many things have to go right for them with John Mateer taking over, where if Washington State just zeroes in on that guy, you're taking away a lot of what Washington State does on offense. So I think Washington State has had a great couple of games to start the year. I think they've done really, really nice things. I think it comes to an end this weekend, and then we'll see what Washington can do going forward. But love seeing these games on the schedule, even though it's not at the end of the year. Still love seeing them on the schedule, and hope they continue even with the new Pac-12 that we will absolutely get into tomorrow. Some great news happening over there on the Pac-12 that we might just get Pac-12 After Dark back. But we'll get into that a little bit more tomorrow. But let's take our third break here. And when we come back, we're going to do a little bit of the questions going into week 3. Did a couple of these yesterday, so if you want to go check that out, definitely do that. But we'll do a couple more today. So we'll break those down right after this, so stick with us.